Story 1. When I began to be treated like a housemaid, chef, accountant, and chauffeur instead of a romantic partner. Story 2. When I realized I was arguing for my worth instead of being loved for it, that was my final wake-up call. Story 3. She woke me up that morning with tea in bed. Then we cuddled with our puppy on the couch while watching a murder documentary. She cut my hair, which she often did, and when I left at noon, she was in the window with the puppy waving me goodbye. I got home at 7 p.m. to find she had left and taken everything, including the puppy and my cash savings, leaving me with a mountain of debt that she had built using my credit cards. A week and a half later, she said she regretted it and asked if we could go to couples counseling to fix things. I replied that the opportunity had passed. I've already received a bit of money back from her, and I'm still working on the debt. A police report was made the morning after, and while court documents haven't been filed, they are ready should the time come when she stops cooperating with me. It's been a little more than 3 months since that day, and I'm honestly much happier now than I was when we were together. But to have almost 10 years end with that level of deceit, I still don't have the words to describe how that feels. Story 4. When I realized that every attempt to discuss a problem was met with silence, I concluded that no relationship is sustainable without the ability to communicate about issues. Story 5. I felt unable to share my feelings, thoughts, or needs without him getting angry and turning it against me. Story 6. When it became clear I was never a priority in his life, every connection we had was either initiated by me or occurred when it was convenient for him. I didn't notice it until deep into our relationship, but looking back, it was evident from the beginning. If someone isn't willing to make sacrifices for you, they aren't a good partner, regardless of anything else they may say or do. Story 7. I had to beg him to take me to the emergency room, which required him to stop his video games. He was very annoyed. They ended up putting me on a gurney at the emergency room and conducting a CT scan. The doctor said he would be back in 5 minutes to tell me if I have cancer in my chest. Those were the worst 5 minutes of my life. My boyfriend at the time looked at me with the most contempt anyone has ever shown me and said, "I hope you know I'm not paying for any of this." Story 8. It dawned on me one day that I had cried for no reason on the way home from work every day for months. Once I got home, I sat in my car staring at the house for a solid 15 minutes before I went inside, steeling myself in case he was in a bad mood, which he often was. Story 9. When their "I love you" started sounding more like a habit than a feeling, that silence said everything. Story 10. When my husband's girlfriend called me to say we should all get along, that was it for me. I considered sending her a thank you card for finally pushing me to remove that abusive, cheating individual from my life. Story 11. When my 11-year-old daughter refused to come over and slapped me when she was drunk, my family almost cut me off. This is what narcissists do. Story 12. I didn't want to come home anymore. I found myself making excuses to stay longer at work or outside instead. Story 13. He had graduated from a master's program and was making plans to move across the country. He didn't discuss it, and I didn't tell him not to go. He assumed I would follow him if he got the job. But I owned a business and home and had no plans to leave. He turned down already accepted jobs locally to pursue a job that was never offered. I ended the relationship. I wanted a partner who would create a life with me, not someone who expected me to follow them dutifully. He ended up very angry and unemployed for over a year. I was grateful not to be involved. Story 14. Almost 45 years ago, my fiancé hit me. There were other serious warning signs before that, but we got through them. However, because my parents supported corporal punishment, I promised myself that I would never tolerate a man who hit me. It activated my self-preservation instinct in a way nothing else had. Story 15. When everything I said or talked about meant nothing at all, it felt like talking to a brick wall. Story 16. He joked about what was bothering me in front of a friend. He dismissed my joy and made me feel excluded from the group. He wasn't there when I asked him for support. Story 17. When I caught myself constantly fantasizing about having relationships with other people due to his addiction to pornography and the fact that our intimacy was usually unsatisfactory, I told myself, this can't continue. I'm not even fantasizing about him. This is over. Story 18. When she cheated, I was more relieved than upset. She woke me up at my place with coffee and a bagel and told me how, during her girls' night out, she got really drunk and had sex with a random guy in the bathroom of the bar. The relationship had been strained for a long time, and we had been on again, off again, but neither of us had gone out and had sex with someone else. It felt like something concrete had happened that would finally merit moving things along in the direction they needed to go in an organic manner. She cried a lot, kept asking me if I was upset, wanted to know what I wanted to do, and tried to initiate intimacy with me. She asked if I would just hold her. I told her I needed some time to sort things out before we talked again. She wouldn't leave until we set up a time and place to do that. When the door closed behind her, I let out a big breath and tried to come to grips with what I was feeling. It was like the first day of summer vacation. Suddenly, everything I could have wanted and hoped for was right in front of me. You don't get many opportunities in life where the answer is as clear as that one was. Story 19. The moment I realized I could no longer trust their words. Once trust is lost, there is no relationship left to save. Story 20. 2 years without intimacy. Everything was great except for that, but eventually, I had to accept that we had essentially become roommates. Story 21. When he came to me, it was only for help. He went out with his friends and never bothered to invite me or make any plans with me. Story 22. It started to feel like if my feelings were hurt, I was overreacting, but if his feelings were hurt, I was just a bad person. In the end, I think it was a miscommunication. He thought that when I was mad, I was actually sad. Story 23. When she made fun of me for going into therapy, it opened my eyes. We had many problems in the 6 years we were together. Story 24. We couldn't even talk about non-relationship topics without it turning into an argument. Too much resentment and distrust had built up and been left unresolved for too long. All connection was gone. We slowly stopped telling each other about our day or week plans, even though we lived together. They could be home for 2 days straight, and only after I asked why did I learn they were on vacation that week. We were strangers cohabitating. Did we go out together? We sometimes ended up avoiding conversation and connection. It's always those missed moments of connection that allow distance to creep in. We avoided uncomfortable discussions that were necessary because we didn't want to create more conflict, when we could have built connection in those moments, gotten closer, and worked out our issues instead of suppressing them and letting resentment build. Looking back, it was doomed from the start. If you have any form of past trauma that affects your ability to communicate or how you show up in relationships, you have to heal that or every relationship will ultimately fail. We both started out with attachment issues. I had disorganized attachment and then became avoidant. I have finally begun to heal and am still on that journey, while they can't even start. After 15 years, I've never been in therapy officially. I've been doing the work the hard way. They've been going for years. To tell a story, you have to be willing to deal with your own issues. Recognize where you are toxic, where you are lacking, and where you need to take accountability and do the work. Life is too short to be imprisoned by past trauma when you can unlearn all of that. Before you can find the person you envision, you have to become that person yourself, someone worthy of the person you want. Story 25. When I stopped caring, I became numb to everything he put me through. One day, I woke up and realized I no longer wanted to deal with him anymore. Story 26. I realized he was using me to secure his stay in the UK. I wanted to break up with him, and he said, "If we break up now, I won't get my stay," which proved he was using me. I met him on Badoo. He was living in Manchester. He told me they were advised to be with someone born here, as it would give them a better chance, but he failed anyway because he was found to have used false documents to enter the country, which he denied. We were together for 6 years. He moved to my town to live with me and stayed for 4 years, but he started showing his true colors. He was domineering and would stare at other girls, which I hated because I'm overweight and my self-esteem and confidence are low. Story 27. When he turned off the power to the house, my children and I couldn't cook or watch television. So I called the police. I've been free ever since. I believe an angel was watching over me and whispered to call them. I couldn't see a way out, but the police helped me. Story 28. When I realized the only times he included me in conversations were when he made a joke at my expense, told an embarrassing story about me, or pointed out a flaw or the fact that I looked uncomfortable. When he forgot about two significant events in my life, which he had promised to attend but did not, and did not even realize he had missed until I brought it up afterwards. When he was unwilling to put my needs before his own or those of complete strangers from whom he wanted validation, and he belittled and shamed me for being upset by that. However, when I could not prioritize his needs, it was seen as a betrayal. When I was being harassed by a mutual acquaintance, but he continued to see them and lied about it. When I asked for help, he did not show up. Story 29. For me, it was not a lack of communication or anything malicious. I just knew that the relationship had run its course. I was 22 when I went to my girlfriend's house. We sat on the couch, talking, and I suddenly started crying. She kept asking what was wrong, and I told her I didn't know. I just felt sad. The truth was that I knew, for whatever reason, at that moment, after almost 3 years, the relationship had run its course, and I was sad about it. I was very close to breaking up right there on the couch, but I was too afraid of dealing with the aftermath of a breakup. We ended up staying together for another 6 months, and that breakup resulted in more hurt feelings for both of us than if I had just ended it that day on the couch. Sometimes lovers drift apart, and that's okay. It just had to be dealt with in a better way than I had done. Story 30. My boyfriend at the time was using a dating app. I'm happy he has found himself, but I dislike that I was used in the process. Story 31. She picked an argument and pressed repeatedly. I'm very quiet as a person, so when all the pushing made me raise my voice a little, it shocked the whole household. Within minutes, I was processing what she said and trying to find a compromise because I really didn't want to live amidst the turmoil. She was surprised at how quickly I went from a height of anger to wanting to resolve things. Through her tears, she said, "Why are you processing this so quickly? I am just going to do this again." In that moment, it became clear she was seeking to be upset and had no real desire for resolution. Story 32. When I was afraid to address anything, I feared they would leave. Living on eggshells in a relationship is exhausting. Story 33. He would leave his journal around the house. I picked it up and flipped through it, feeling disgusted by his descriptions of me, my children, my friends, and my family. He was contemptuous and cruel towards all of us. It was stomach-turning. Story 34. He yelled at me repeatedly to drown out the sound of my voice. After the argument, I let him win and begged him to apologize so we could make up. Instead of apologizing, he told me I deserved it for what I had done in the past. He refused to apologize for the rest of the night. That same night, he threw something at me. When I told him in the meekest voice possible, "Please don't do that. It scares me," he threw it at me again and said I deserved it. I can't believe I dated this person for 3 years up to that point. Story 35. When we hadn't seen each other for over 2 weeks, I said I missed him, but he went silent. We had many challenges before that, and I decided it was over that night. Story 36. When I realized that every discussion and argument we had always led to her talking over me to emphasize her point and win the conversation, her point was always considered right, while mine were just mere possibilities. We broke up in January, and it has been the easiest healing journey I have experienced after a breakup. Story 37. When nothing changes, communication is essential. But if nothing changes, what is the point? If a person continues to do the same things year after year, how do you move forward without losing motivation? Story 38. I found out my father had terminal cancer, and I didn't want to tell him. I felt emotionally unsafe around him, so I didn't want him to know. I realized it was over at that moment. Story 39. I didn't quite realize it at the time, but looking back, I can pinpoint it as the moment my disillusionment snapped. To be clear, we had never really been good prior to this. I had jumped at him as possibly my last attempt at having marriage, family, and kids, and he was a mess. He was an indecisive partner, incapable of being my friend, and too buried in his own issues to be my partner. I was a list of responsibilities to him, and he was simply potential. After a year and a half of hard work, I bought a house. He had already been staying with me, so we moved in together. The house was a mess, boarded up without cleaning, sitting for 8 months without power before it was sold. There was so much to do, and I closed much later in the summer than I anticipated. With only a few weeks before school and teaching would start again, I rushed to Massachusetts to finally pick up the cat I had left with my ex years before. I knew Pilot was sickly, but I was stunned by what I saw when I picked him up. He refused to drink water during the car ride, so I drove straight home. I took him to the veterinarian the next day. Irritable bowel syndrome was a possibility, and so was cancer. Since Pilot was 15, I opted for palliative care, and I would love him as much as I could for the time he had left. My ex was difficult about the cat. He didn't want Pilot in the bed with us, but Pilot was used to sleeping with people, so he cried at the door. I had to put a box fan by the door to discourage him. My ex would even get upset about Pilot sitting close to us when we were on the couch, saying Pilot's loud purring bothered him. I distinctly remember him pushing Pilot away aggressively one time so he wouldn't come near me. How I didn't immediately snap and tell this man in his 30s to go away. I don't know. I'm so mad at myself for caving. Those were my last months with my baby, and he just wanted to be close to me, and I let him get turned away. The resentment started there. Story 40. He was designated driver for my girlfriend and me on my birthday night. He dropped us off downtown sober and picked us up in his car while intoxicated. It's one thing to put my life at risk, but also my friends. What were you thinking? Story 41. I told her over dinner that I was going to get an apartment on the other side of the city. I was starting a business and needed to be closer to my potential clients. An apartment made business sense, but it also marked my first step out of a 35-year marriage that was coming to an end. Her reaction when I mentioned the apartment was simply, okay. And then the conversation moved on. Just, okay. A year or two later, we were separated, and 2 years after that, we were divorced. Story 42. When he said he was starting to fall in love with someone else, he was honest, and I thanked him for not cheating on me. He wanted to continue, but I ended the relationship. I said we didn't need to go through the process of waiting to see if he would stay with me or develop feelings for the other girl. Years later, we saw each other, and he expressed that he wished we had stayed together. I replied that it was too late for that. Story 43. If I wanted to talk about problems, I would either have excuses or give the silent treatment. If she wanted to discuss issues, I had to be on her side. If I was not on the same side, then I was wrong, and there was no room for agreement or other points of view. Story 44. When I was tired of being mistreated by her, I ended up crying at night because I had given her so many chances. The last time I cried, she got annoyed and walked away from me. I realized then that I had to let her go. Story 45. I kept crying during intimacy for no reason, telling him I was just in my head and overthinking everything, so we would always stop before he could finish. He was usually okay with it and comforted me until I calmed down. Finally, one time, I guess he was tired of playing the nice guy and directly asked me to just get out of your head for like 10 minutes. I'll be quick. I later realized that my tears were actually my brain's way of telling me to leave that relationship. Story 46. When I discovered he was spreading rumors about me and telling me what to do, I realized I am accomplished and focused on my own affairs. Story 47. When I decided to give up on him, I realized there were some areas where we weren't compatible and couldn't find common ground. There was a lot of manipulation from his side as well. Eventually, I stopped caring about him and chose to leave. Story 48. When she stopped saying she loved me, it took a few more months for me to realize it was over because I'm an idiot. Story 49. When I found out she was seeing another guy, there were no signs or prior concerns, but that definitely made me realize it was over. Being young and petty, I then hooked up with her friend, who she always thought had a thing for me, but didn't. Somehow, I managed to charm my way into that. Story 50. She started having doubts about her feelings toward me. Feels like I am the only one truly trying. This is actually happening now, and I feel sick, to be honest. Story 51. He wasn't from my city and told me his brother died by suicide when he was 12, without having contact with any family or friends of his. I took this at face value and held him whenever he got too drunk and cried. 3 months in, we were having a barbecue at my house, and a song came on. He told my friend that it was his brother's funeral song. It was a song that was 4 years old, and we were all 30 at the time. It all unraveled from there. He turned out to be a massive liar and narcissist, which led to violence, restraining orders, and a lot of trauma. Story 52. He decided to move 50 minutes away to the other side of the city without prior discussion about it and its implications for our relationship. I did not have a license at the time, and public transportation options were limited. Message received, you can kindly leave if you wish. Story 53. Everything was always my fault. He would never apologize if he was wrong. He said he would be back in 2 weeks, but then he kept delaying with excuses. It has been over 6 months now, and he has no intention of returning. So yes, I am raising a toddler and a small baby. Story 54. 4 years before I divorced my wife, we were on a road trip back to my hometown. We did not see my family very often, and I was close with them. Despite that, she didn't want to see them the first night we arrived, and it was not a late arrival. She was somewhat selfish, and this was kind of a final straw after 6 years together. Of course, I wasn't perfect either, and she wasn't happy. In the car, I had a moment of realization. I don't want to be married to someone who does this. This is not going to last. It didn't, but thankfully we stuck it out for another 4 years to have 2 fantastic kids, who are 2 of the greatest joys of my life. I would do it all over again for them. No regrets. That's when I knew during that car ride that it wasn't going to last. I think we all know when we know. It's a matter of gathering the courage to say something or getting upset enough to speak up. One of those eventually happens. Story 55. One day I got home, and he had arrived early. I remember dreading going through the door. That was the beginning. Story 56. The day after I returned from a trip, my ex sent me an email saying I wasn't trying hard enough and that I wasn't doing enough. He mentioned that we were likely going to break up if I didn't improve my behavior. I had recently been diagnosed with multiple mental health issues that I had struggled with my whole life without realizing it. I spent the whole night crying, and the next day I decided that if my best wasn't good enough for him, it would never be enough. So I left him. Story 57. She packed her things and the kids' stuff and moved out while I was on holiday. When I returned, I thought maybe she doesn't want to be with me anymore. Story 58. After repeating myself numerous times about things that could improve their situation, they continued to ignore my suggestions. This behavior is quite immature and indicates a lack of self-reflection. Story 59. When we got into a huge fight on the courthouse steps on the way to get our marriage license, he showed up at my mother's doctor's appointment, as she had just moved to our state, and made me get out of her car and into his to go get the license. I had to give her directions to get back to the house by herself. Hindsight, right? Story 60. He died, signaling the end of things. I apologize to anyone who might be offended by my tone. It was fairly recent, and sarcasm is part of my coping mechanism. Story 61. When I realized that I wanted to address the issues we were facing, I was met with reassurances that everything was fine and great, though that was not the reality. There was no affection, love, or intimacy anymore, and we were more like roommates. That's when I knew the end was near. Story 62. He tried to belittle my best friend of 20 years, even though I had only been with him for a year. When we broke up, he admitted he was jealous of her. It was unusual. My now husband and she are friends. Story 63. When my girlfriend asked me how my self-employment was going, which I had put on hiatus 3 months earlier. Story 64. If anything happened between us and I tried to discuss it, it always became about how bad a partner he was and how he didn't understand why I stayed with him. He expressed so much self-hatred. I was never allowed to express my feelings or be upset because he was always more upset, and I had to make him feel better. Any discussion of my feelings was halted because he was so distressed that I caught him lying or engaged in other questionable behavior. One day, I found out my grandfather had died. I called him in tears and begged him to come over, but he refused because he was going to the pub with his friends. When he came over 2 days later, I shared how upset I was and how much I needed him. He turned the conversation around to focus on his own issues. I was finished with the situation. I agreed with him and told him to leave. The next day, I returned his belongings and ended our relationship. Story 65. Instead of having a serious conversation about why we should break up, he decided to move out of state without me. It was confusing at first, but then I understood. Story 66. We argued in every conversation. I could tell she disliked me. At a certain point, the pain of being alone felt easier than the pain of feeling like it was a battle every time I spoke with my partner. Story 67. He disappeared, and I was worried something horrible had happened, so I reached out to his family. He was fine. I was not. Story 68. I found out she was lying to protect my feelings. After that, any form of communication or interaction resulted in very brief responses, and she gradually distanced herself. It took a lot of heartbreak for me to realize she just couldn't express her thoughts, and I was left feeling confused and overthinking until I moved on. Story 69. She suddenly realized she was giving an ultimatum during each conflict. While I have tried to understand each of her points and address them, she couldn't name even one thing that bothered me. Story 70. When communication was primarily one-sided, it was clear that this would not improve, regardless of how many times I brought it up. Story 71. When we decided to take a break, she was already on a dating site, smiling in my face about it. She asked if I had started looking around, but I hadn't. At the same time, she was entertaining another guy, and yes, they were seeing each other. Story 72. When she began yelling at me in the kitchen that I was wasting time volunteering for a nonprofit community radio station while playing Maroon 5, she recently responded to a young boy of 8 during a little league game, telling him and his parents that money can, in fact, buy happiness. I have never looked back. Story 73. Always late, never on time, always an excuse. Considering I see him once a week, this happens every week. I'm bored. Story 74. Among the things he did to others, it was when I read him a meme about confidence and how it can mean you're not overly competitive that his expression changed to one of major disgust and disappointment. If I wasn't making someone else feel bad, he didn't understand how I could be happy. I was miserable when every day had to be so cutthroat. Everyone can shine and no one should feel lesser. This may sound ridiculous. I guess you had to experience it to understand what I mean. I'm happier. Story 75. When he was no longer at home in the afternoons when I got home from work, it gradually grew from 2 days to 5 days. Story 76. She didn't call me. I told her to end the long-distance relationship so I could come to her city, and we could stay close, but she rejected it. She doesn't even message, doesn't call, doesn't care. This all started from the day she began staying at home all the time. Story 77. He experienced road rage and forced another driver off the road, which triggered an anxiety attack in me. It brought back memories of when my ex nearly killed me by pulling the steering wheel while I was driving, causing the car to spin and end up nose-to-nose with a semi-truck. Fortunately, there was no crash. Story 78. Her inability to understand my pain or truly empathize is significant. I also want to highlight that I pay attention to patterns. It is not about one specific incident. It is a pattern of reactivity and insensitivity. I do not make judgments based on single events. I need to build a case that compounds within me emotionally. Story 79. In my case, after years of having it made very clear to me that even the suggestion of a threesome was absolutely off the table, and how dare I even suggest such a thing, I discovered quite by accident that for some time during our relationship, she had been having regular threesomes with 2 friends, 1 male and 1 female, both also in committed relationships. It's been over 30 years, and even thinking about it still makes me want to go out and punch a wall. Story 80. Ever the optimist, I thought our love was strong enough that counseling could heal us. During a lunch meeting and a long string of events, what I thought was me being helpful by taking my wife's phone so it wouldn't be stolen, as we both momentarily left her purse alone, led to a new realization. Her phone kept buzzing. I assumed it was just her sister checking up on her. I pulled her phone from my pocket to see multiple texts from Mike. I opened the phone. We used to be very trusting, so this shouldn't have been a problem. It was clear he was obviously a boyfriend and had been for long enough that there was discussion of where they could move and what schools the kids could attend. From the texts, I could tell she had already moved on. There was nothing left to save. Story 81. He went away to train for a new job, and it was a chore for him to even text me once a day. I would check on him, but it was never reciprocated. My dad was going through heart surgery, and my ex would only say things like, "This job is my dream, and I don't have time to care about anything else." That made it clear where I stood. He ended up cheating with one of his new coworkers, which further explained everything. Story 82. When I wanted to discuss something that made me uneasy and sought a compromise, I was met with comments like, "That's your problem. I can't do anything about that. And it's okay to communicate, but enough is enough." This was around March. Looking back, it should have ended around late November, about 1 month in, when I shared my perspective on relationships, and she responded, "You can't know about that. I'm your first relationship." Story 83. When I realized his job and his young adult children would always take priority over our relationship, 9 years of being in third place took its toll. Story 84. After 4 years of never receiving flowers or anything at all without me asking for it or him telling me, "The more you ask, the less I will get you," he made me a thoughtful DIY photo gift, bouquets of flowers, plushies, and a card with a personal message for Valentine's Day. However, I felt absolutely nothing when he gave it to me. I realized my love had run out. The waiting and patience I had wore thin for so long. I understood that I had to end it. When that feeling hits, you know it will never work. Story 85. When I couldn't stop drinking and treated her poorly because of it, no one deserves that. I'm sober now but feel empty without her. Story 86. My little brother passed away while she was on a girls' trip. She didn't come home. I was alone for a few days before she returned. That helped me understand that it was truly over. For context, she was a 45-minute flight away. She just didn't change her ticket or plans. Story 87. I felt anxious and sick to my stomach leading up to seeing him. During the last couple of months of the relationship, I attributed my feelings to regular anxiety. I also felt like I had to walk on eggshells because the smallest things would make him angry. I am so glad to be out of that relationship. Story 88. When our couples therapist asked us what we loved most about each other, I could think of many things about who he was as a person, like how smart and funny he was and what a good conversationalist he was. His answer, however, focused on how organized I was. It became clear that he loved me mainly because I cleaned, booked our trips, and took care of everything. After that, I never looked at him the same way again. Story 89. When I was overwhelmed with guilt about something I had done, even after she forgave me, her touch felt painful. I specifically remember the moment I recoiled when she tried to embrace me. Story 90. She lied about there being a group hangout so I would spend time with her. It was very uncomfortable when nobody else showed up. I wasn't a good boyfriend, and that made me realize I wasn't being fair to her. I try to be better now. Story 91. He said we shouldn't be in a relationship because of religious reasons, and I agreed. Then I broke up with him the next day. Mind you, it was an online relationship. Story 92. We went from being friends who would joke around and have fun to being serious and overly sensitive. I would get jealous when he hung out with a friend who was a girl that we both knew, and he would scold me for taking too big a bite of his sandwich. Our dynamic drastically changed once the labels of boyfriend and girlfriend were applied. I had to end it because it felt unhappy all the time. We are still friends, though we aren't very close, and I think that's how it was always meant to be. Story 93. We weren't always like this, but over the years, our relationship slowly spiraled into a situation where I felt utterly lonely, even when he was sitting right next to me. I'm sure he would say the same. I had a part in this, I must admit. My holier-than-thou attitude gave me permission to be distant because my distractions were furthering my career, while his distractions were simply for fun. Either way, after nearly 20 years together, we had become two different people living two different lives in two different homes, occasionally coming together in harmony for brief moments in time, and experiencing chaos or ambivalence otherwise. Once again, in an effort to further my career and self-worth, I found myself in a position where I needed help. I was volunteering for a cross-country event to support cancer research, and I needed someone to be with my 2 dogs for 5 days while I participated. My ex said it was completely unreasonable for him, the only person who knew my dogs, one of which used to be his, to help with this request. That was the last straw. I thought, I could get more help from a stranger than from my own husband. Within the next 2 months, I built my resolve. I left my husband, found someone I could trust to watch my dogs, and went on that cross-country trip. That trip turned out to be a fleeting week in which I found my freedom from my old life. Story 94. When my ex texted me asking if I could do something for him, I replied it depended on what it was, and then he said to harm myself. Story 95. It seems a bit silly, but I was in college and dating my boyfriend at the time. We were on summer break, but I worked 2 jobs and he worked one, so we hung out when we could. When I was busy, he would spend time with a group of girls, one of whom was my cousin. I felt jealous, but I figured my cousin would look out for me and tell me if anything happened. He started to become very withdrawn around me. He never wanted to do anything outside the house. He just wanted to spend time at his parents' home with me. One night, it was a beautiful summer evening. After finishing work, I wanted to go to the beach for dinner. I drove to his house, but he wanted to stay in and watch a movie. I was annoyed and didn't want to waste the evening, so I left. I went to the beach by myself and did some reflecting. I ended up breaking up with him the next day. Within a week, he was dating one of the girls he had been hanging out with, my cousin's best friend. This was over 7 years ago, and they just got engaged this year. Looking back, I think he was just done investing energy in our relationship because he was redirecting it to someone else. It hurt back then, but if we hadn't broken up, I wouldn't have met my now husband. So it all worked out. Story 96. Telling him, you don't realize how scary it is to get yelled at by you because no one ever treats you like that. I've learned to listen for the sound of your footsteps to figure out if you're mad or okay. I expected him to listen and stop acting like that. No, it didn't work. I told him almost every day that I'm depressed and daydream about going to the woods to end my life where no one would find me. I wake up wishing I didn't have to start another day. Not that I expect him to save me. These are my issues. It would have been nice to talk about them. Instead, he laughed. Then I discovered messages to other girls. He said, "Oh no, I'm not talking to her. She's just part of the group." He also said, "When I was playing that game, I was talking to this girl, person. There were messages that said, 'I miss chatting with you,' and she sent, 'I miss talking to my buddy.'" He tells me it was innocent messages about the game that I took out of context and that he's definitely not talking to anyone. I tried to initiate alone time. We have a 12-year age gap. I currently have the libido he did 18 years ago. He does not. It was a lot of things at once. I realized that I don't have the patience nor do I have the desire to put any effort into him anymore. Maybe it's my fault. I don't know. Story 97. He cheated on me with his ex-girlfriend. I was devastated, but we were newly married, so I tried to stay. He promised me repeatedly that he would never do it again. Less than a month later, I caught him texting her, saying he was still in love with her. I knew without a doubt it was over for good. When I confronted him, he denied it until I showed him the evidence. Then he gaslit me, claiming it was my fault because I was a bad wife. Story 98. When I was experiencing gastritis pain during vacation, I told him I could not eat the spicy noodles for breakfast as he had planned. He started shouting at me for ruining his plan and said I did not respect his leadership. I cried in the car he was driving and asked him to give me 10 minutes and not to scold me. Story 99. When he left me to do his own thing for over an hour, I discovered some shocking news while we were together. A guy called him out on his unacceptable behavior, and I should have done the same, but I was too upset to address it at the time. Story 100. A car stopped near the house, and a man stepped outside and started looking through the fence. I went outside and asked if I could help him. He said, "Your friend owes money. Tell her to come outside." Then everything became clear, and a few days later it was over. The audacity of that person to look me in the eyes and lie about very obvious things. Story 101. I caught my wife in a blatant lie, and she refused to address the matter. The following morning, I went to the office and called my brother, who went to my house and packed my things while my wife was at work. That day, I took off on my boat to another state and eventually to Mexico, where I retired comfortably and never looked back. I eventually divorced my ex-wife and have never been happier. I am loving my life with my new wife, who is a beautiful woman. Story 102. When my closest brother died, she started giving her diagnosis and offered to call her sister, who is a doctor. There was no acknowledgement of the loss, no support, and no sympathy. To this day, there has been none. He passed away 6 years ago. My soon-to-be ex-wife is not a doctor. Story 103. There were many signs, but the main one was when I found myself scowling whenever he came over. His presence did not bring me joy. I was just waiting for him to leave. My body was so tense and stressed that I actually slept better when he left the country. Selfish, disingenuous, and untrustworthy. Story 104. There were many problems leading up to this. My wife asked me if I wanted to have another child. My honest answer to her was that I did want another child, but not with her. It just kind of came out, and then I knew for sure. Story 105. It was going relatively well, with no major issues that couldn't be resolved. One day, she told me she thought she might be pregnant. We went through the process of verifying whether she was pregnant or not. I always use condoms, so it seemed a bit strange, but accidents happen. She ended up not being pregnant, but then she started acting irrationally, saying we should not go to the apartment that night because there was danger. I realized at that point that something wasn't right. I eventually found my own apartment and left her. I later learned from her grandmother that she had been hiding a diagnosis of schizophrenia from me. She was unmedicated, and those weeks during which she believed she was pregnant were all in her head. Story 106. Whenever I was compelled to believe I was making a mountain out of molehills, the penny finally dropped. Story 107. She was really mean to her daughter. Her daughter was 3 when we first started dating, and she would put the television on for her daughter and then berate her if she didn't sit perfectly still. I said, "Hey, the child is 3. They wiggle. That's what they do. She's not hurting you. Just leave her alone, or take her across the street to the park and let her burn off some energy." No, she couldn't handle it. I couldn't commit to a relationship with someone who mistreats their children. I was fortunate. If I hadn't seen how she treated her daughter, I might have thought she was a good candidate for marriage and had children with her, and I would have had to watch her treat my children like that. Story 108. He got upset when I noticed that a pan wasn't washed well and left without saying goodbye. After 2 days, he came to me, but I didn't want to return. Story 109. I could not achieve an erection with her. She had a work husband, fell in love with him, and was unfaithful. We were high school sweethearts and broke up after 6.5 years. Story 110. When he strangled me because I wouldn't stop talking after I saw him kissing another woman while we were on vacation after 7 years together. Silencing me was easier than taking accountability, I guess. Story 111. He asked to stay over for 3 days, and then I couldn't get him to leave for 3 months. I quickly realized that he hoped to stay long enough for me to say, "Forget it. Move in with me." The pressure on my boundaries, despite my clear discomfort, coupled with hints of gaslighting and manipulation at the end, completely turned me off to him and made me want him out faster. I kicked him out and ended things shortly after he said, "Well, if you keep me waiting too long, I'll stop denying all these other girls who want me." It's been 3 years, and the only girl he's had nearly caught him a felony. Story 112. When I told her how I felt, she compared me to her 15-year-old insecure self. I was, in fact, 22 and so was she. Story 113. He was my first crush, and I confessed my feelings first. In the beginning, everything seemed perfect to me until I started to notice that I was the more proactive one, asking him to be more engaged. He was trying, but it wasn't enough for me. I really wanted the same treatment I gave. We discussed this often, but then I realized I shouldn't try to change him. Instead, I decided to stop putting pressure on him and look for someone who would be willing to take initiative without needing requests. Story 114. Today, I fell off my bicycle while riding due to a slippery road in front of a restaurant caused by too much oil. My knees were seriously injured. I took a picture to show him the wounds, but instead of empathizing with my condition, he accused me of wearing a skirt while riding. He asked if anyone saw my underwear and remarked that it must be embarrassing to fall in front of so many people. I replied that I was wearing pants. I had just pulled them up to take the picture. I didn't care whether people saw me fall or not because I was only worried about the severity of my injury at that moment. However, he insisted that the wounds looked as if my legs were naked and said I should dress more appropriately next time and not wear a skirt while riding. What is wrong with him? Story 115. We went through a McDonald's drive-thru, and he treated a worker with special needs poorly. He snapped at him for getting the order wrong. I looked into the back seat where our 1-year-old son was sitting and thought, no, this man had abused me for years, cheated on me, lied repeatedly, and none of it made me consider leaving. In that moment in the car, I could see his heart very clearly for the first time. That was 10 years ago, and I haven't seen him since. I am now a special needs educator and have a wonderful life as a single parent with my son. I'm finally starting to love myself again. Story 116. Our casual conversations became less frequent, and our serious conversations focused more on airing resentment and grudges than on building our relationship. Story 117. When she told me she was going to buy a house with her mother and fully commit to raising her siblings, her response to, "What about us and our future?" was essentially, Story 118. Past relationship. He looked at me for a long time the day he was moving to a different country. I kept asking, what? It was a terrible relationship, and it was best for both of us that it ended regardless of the move. It was tough at the time, though. Story 119. He laughed at me when I told him my grandmother passed away. It was not a nervous laugh, but a genuine chuckle, followed by, "I guess you'll have to cancel our vacation then." Story 120. Double standards. He would say he didn't like talking on the phone and wouldn't call me, just text, and sometimes wouldn't have the capacity to listen to me and hope that was okay. I said that was fine. Then he asked to call me one night after my first day at a new job when I was exhausted, and I said not tonight, I'm tired. He held it against me for a year. If I ever received a text message from a male, he would say, "You talk to other guys all day and night but won't talk to me." This was untrue, but he twisted it that way over one incident and repeatedly threw fits about it. He got mad at me for urinating on a hike in the bushes, sexualizing it and expressing disgust by saying, "You pulled your pants down in front of people," and repeatedly brought it up for a year, no matter how much I explained that it was normal. He banned me from having male friends altogether, but he has female friends. When I would try to talk to him, he would interrupt me and talk to my dog, and I would just stop mid-sentence and he wouldn't even notice. To top it all off, he never told his family or friends I even existed after being together for a year and a half. Red flags were everywhere. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.